Welcome into another edition of the Musketeer Report podcast. Today is November 13th. Xavier is 2-1 after their most recent loss, 87-68 to Santa Clara. That was after beating Mare 66-62 and Lemoyne 74-69 to start the season. The Musketeers are ranked 102nd in KenPom currently, and we're going to start this show off of a message that I got on the premium message board at musketeerreport.com. The question was, well, let's start out like this. I'd love to hear your straightforward insights on Xavier Hoops. Specifically, what are your honest thoughts on the State of the X program, the complexities of NIL funding there, and Richard Pitino's initial roster challenge? After the Santa Clara loss, the doom and gloom on the sport and X is unbearable. Not many people know X Hoops more than you, and I would love to hear your general State of the Union on Xavier. So I don't mind that question, and I saw enough people commenting there that I guess we will go ahead and address it. I would start by saying I've been giving you guys my thoughts on where Xavier is at this entire time, where the complexities of the NIL situation have been going back to last spring when the portal started. It doesn't change for me because they had one embarrassing loss. I know for you guys, you feel like there has to be something new or some big change in feelings or thoughts after that, but it really isn't that much different from what I've been saying, but I'm happy to reiterate some of those things. I had predicted an 11-20 season for Xavier. I predicted them to be 2-1 at this point. So the way they've started the season is not shocking to me. I would change my prediction now slightly to 7-24 or 8-23 because I do think they look a little bit worse than I had even predicted. I think it's going to be very difficult for them to win any more than one or two Big East games. I think they are going to be kind of similar to that Seton Hall team from last year. But that's been consistent. I've been saying this team is really going to struggle. So let's start with focusing on the actual team. To me, the biggest issue is a startling lack of top-end talent. You have no one that's really close to being a number one or a number two option for a Big East team right now. And maybe that'll change as we go. I mean, we've seen guys really explode as the season goes on. I think Quincy Oliveri is the best recent example of that, where he looked like he was struggling through the preseason, the first few regular season games, and then he put together one of the best single seasons in Xavier history. So there's still time for guys to get it on track and get going. All of this is very new with an entire roster, new system, and a new coach. So that's, to me, the biggest issue, though, right now is that none of the guys look like they're ready to be an alpha or a go-to player for a Big East team. Malik Messina-Moore not attempting a single shot against Santa Clara, despite being the team's leading scorer going into that game, I think is a perfect display of that. I think it's kind of sums up that issue better than anything I could say. Also, there's nothing that this team really excels at. There's nothing to hang its hat on. They can't rely on three-point shooting. They don't really have any type of post-up presence to throw the ball into when they need a bucket or need to draw a foul. They're not a great rebounding team. They try to play fast, but they don't really have the firepower to get that going. There's just nothing that really stands out as a positive for this group or as a clear strength. And so that's been hard to watch as well. On the defensive side, which is what I was most curious to watch with this team, so far it looks like they just don't have the athletes to play the style that they're trying to play. They've been able to create some turnovers against mid-major competition, but when they haven't gotten the turnovers, they've been getting beat for lots of easy baskets. They're allowing opponents to shoot 58.3% from 3-point range, or from 2-point range rather, and nearly 69% on shots at the rim. So there's no rim protection going on right now, despite all the size that they have. Lastly, about the team, I think there's nothing right now. And again, we're 3 games in. This stuff can still change. But I understand why people are concerned after the first 3 games and the way they've looked. Right now, there doesn't appear to be anything to dream on or get excited about going forward. They need some of the sophomores, any of the guys with eligibility still, to step up and improve and start to look the part. They can't be replacing an entirely new roster next year. So for me, that's what this season now becomes about. I don't think they have a chance at making the NCAA tournament. I'm sure they would disagree with that. They're going to keep competing. Everything's still in front of them and all of that stuff. But right now, for me, this season becomes seeing how these guys that still have eligibility going forward develop and how they play within this new system. And if you can get a couple of those guys up to speed and they look better by the end of the season, then your projections for next year start to look a lot better. But if you're putting together an entirely new roster again when you get to this spring in the transfer portal, well, then you're probably going to be stuck overpaying and stretching your budget too thin and be in a really difficult spot again. So as a Xavier fan, you're hoping that doesn't happen. Now, the other part of this is if the roster is as bad as it looks so far, why is it so bad? And is there any hope going forward? I think people want to hop on one side of the fence here with this when multiple things can be true at once. First thing is Richard Pitino and his staff were in a nearly impossible situation last spring during the portal season. You had to put together an entirely new roster. So people will start throwing out the numbers and say like, well, they had $5.5–6 million to work with. That's a decent amount of money. And it is, but you also had to put together an entirely new roster. You need at least like 11 guys, 11 guys who can play, and you're having to pay all of them, and all of them through the portal where you're overpaying a little bit. And with it starting a little bit late, you didn't know you were going to be at Xavier, all that. A lot of these guys and their agents are back-channeling, working deals before you even get that job. They have an idea of where you're going, so you're bidding against other teams and trying to win out in those recruitments. You are going to overpay. There's no doubt that last year was a really difficult situation in that regard. And then you factor in the new rules that were coming into effect. Everyone talked about that July 1st date and things got pushed back. It was kind of chaotic as that all came down in terms of the ruling. But the impression that everyone was under as they were in the transfer portal window was that on July 1st, all the rules were going to change. Schools were going to be able to start paying players directly. And so a lot of the schools were emptying whatever NIL collective money they had, asking their donors for whatever they could help them out with up front before July 1st, paying that to the players. They had to get it all out. And then they were telling the players, hey, we're going to be able to double dip though here. The schools will start paying you after July 1st. So when you start talking about some of these rosters that got into crazy numbers, that's the type of thing that was going on there. And obviously, those schools are doubling up on Xavier's budget in the transfer portal last year, or even more so. So that's the first thing, is that the situation was impossibly difficult for Richard Pitino and his staff. I don't know that they could have put together a good team regardless of what happened, even if had everything worked out ideally for them. But the second part of this that can also be true is they might have flat out missed on some of the guys that they got or paid the wrong guys the wrong amounts, and that happens. I mean, Xavier has missed on tons of recruits since I've been doing this. It's pretty standard stuff from year to year. You don't hit on everybody. This year's team was just in a spot where they couldn't afford any misses at the top. You needed to hit on almost all of your guys, or you weren't going to be very good. And right now, so far through 3 games, it's looking about as bad as I think they could have looked. So yeah, both of those things can be true. They can be in an impossible situation where they probably weren't going to be able to field an NCAA tournament team or a Big East team that was going to be competitive. But you can also look at it and say, but it looks like they might have also missed on some of these guys, and these guys aren't playing well, and there's a lot of concerns for what that means going forward. Both of those things are true in my opinion right now, and it's understandable to think that way. So the other part of that I mentioned was, is there reason to have hope going forward? I think we've already seen that there are issues with the agreement that was put in place from the court rulings, and then the NCAA and the new clearinghouse that was created to approve NIL collective deals. There are obvious issues with that. That thing has already been put through the ringer. It may have somewhat failed to this point already, but I still fully think the new system has slowed down the bigger football schools, the SEC, and the Big Ten, at least somewhat. And also, if nothing else, you won't be in the same situation as last year where all those schools are dumping all of their NIL collective money at once ahead of that July 1st rule change and then double dipping with the schools paying them right after that. So that's going to be different. And again, I do think, we talk about everyone in terms of fans have been pushing back on the NCAA, the clearinghouse. It's actually an independent clearinghouse that is going to rule on those NIL collective deals. And I get that, but part of what they're also missing is that there is no longer just this big pot of NIL collective money sitting there where your donors can throw whatever money they want at it. It sits in a pot, and then the guys are just getting pay for play money. You take it out or say, we're going to pay this guy this amount, and he gets it. That's not happening anymore. Now you actually are going through the channels of creating an NIL deal. The player is going to be some type of spokesperson or do something for your business at that point. And that's just another layer of complications. And also some of these businesses, these donors don't want to necessarily be associated with specific players and all that. So it's going to slow it down. I really believe it's going to slow it down for that reason and for other reasons as well that are a little more complex and more difficult to get into. But I do think that the Big East is going to be in a better spot going into next year. Xavier's definitely going to be in a better spot going into next year. And you have to at least let next offseason and probably one more play out before we really have much of a clue of whether there's hope going forward or whether Xavier's in a bad spot compared to the rest of college basketball as it relates to NIL and the transfer portal. Last year was super unique for the entire sport, and additionally so for Xavier because they were replacing a coach and replacing an entirely new roster. Let's see what it looks like when whatever the new normal kind of settles into place here over the next few years. And we'll see where it's at then. I just don't know how you can make a judgment on it before we see what this coming transfer portal season and probably the following looks like. I mean, we'll definitely have a better idea after this year, but I'd probably like to give it one more because, again, Xavier could be in a spot where they're replacing a lot of their roster in this year's transfer portal coming up. So it could be tough once again for them to put together an entirely new team that's going to be, NCAA tournament bound or competing at the top of the Big East bound. We will see how that goes. Additionally to that, I would add, it is possible that, after a year or two of this, it's slowed down and all of a sudden the Big East is doing better and those schools are competing better than the SEC and the Big Ten schools are at the top of the sport. I do think it's entirely possible that the SEC and the Big Ten manipulate the rules in their favor again and continue to spend more money, and Xavier struggles to compete with those guys financially. I do think that's possible. I understand the concerns. I'm not trying to dismiss them. But for right now, the way things are set up at this very moment going forward, I think Xavier is in a better spot going forward than they've been the last few seasons. I think the Big East is in a better spot than they've been the last few seasons. So let's see where it goes from there. Yes, it could change down the line. Yes, there is a history of the big boys making everything work in their favor. But this also isn't their cash cow. This isn't football. That they manipulate things for football typically, not for basketball. So we're going to have to wait and see on some of this. The other, it's also possible the situation is better in the spring. Next year looks better, and then the Musketeers are rolling in year 3 of the Pitino era. I don't understand the strong sentiment that I'm hearing from some fans that this is some sort of endpoint for the program. As if things don't turn around immediately, then Xavier will have to stop participating in the sport or something. I don't really get that concept. I don't feel that pressure or that finality to end of this. I feel like Xavier is in a tough spot right now. Programs go through dips. They've got a brand new coach. Let's see where it goes for the next 2 to 3 years with the new coach, and then you can kind of judge it after that. I don't think college basketball is going to cease to exist in 2 or 3 years, or that there's going to be a cutoff line and Xavier's going to be on the wrong side of that in the upcoming 24 months. So it has to be a little bit wait and see with some of this in terms of the gravity of some of these questions that I was being asked on the message board about Xavier's place in the sport and if there's reason for hope going forward. It's we will see. I can't be certain about any of it, but I don't think it's changed that much just because they lost to Santa Clara. Let me go ahead and fill in a couple of other notes just of things I've heard from people I've talked to going back really a couple months, but certainly over the last couple days as people have been pretty worked up about this. There's definitely been more conversation going on. And I have heard from some people that have an idea, some people that are actually involved, that they believe there's a path to Xavier having a competitive NIL budget that is towards the top of the Big East next year. And I don't think they're blowing smoke. I don't think it's wishful thinking. I don't think it's Jim who has season tickets in the lower bowl and talks to a source. Like it's not that. It's people who are really actually involved. They feel like there's a path to things being really good for Xavier as soon as this coming spring. However, I think, based on the conversations that I've had, for that path to come to fruition, there has to be a lot of buy-in from the big money people. And so then the big question becomes, what does this season do to the buy-in from those big money people that are involved? Are they going to be fully in on this and think, Xavier's basketball program has to improve and they need to fix this as soon as possible? Or are they going to feel like this thing has gotten out of control? I think Xavier's lost its way a little bit with the basketball thing. I'm out on this altogether. I really don't know where the sentiment is going to be for most of those big money people. I know at least the few that I have connections to are gung-ho about getting Xavier back to the top of the Big East. And again, there is some optimism that Xavier will be in that position as soon as this spring in terms of their resources for paying players. The number I've heard, if we got to get specific about it, and again, you hear different numbers constantly. These things are always changing. So if someone at Xavier wants to step up and tell me that's ridiculous, you're completely wrong, and give me some type of accurate number that I can go with, I'd be happy to do a reprint here. I would be happy to correct myself on the record. But the number I've heard that they're trying to get into is that $10 million range that we've heard is the top of the Big East. And there are some people involved who think it's a possibility. Whether it actually comes to fruition, whether we actually ever know for sure what that number looks like, I don't know. It's also secretive, and there's so much, as Coach Pitino said on his radio show, there's a lot of agents and coaches and players out there lying about what the numbers are. And then there's also just a lot of uncertainty. So it's hard to say for sure. But why don't we do this? Why don't we bring in an expert to talk more about this NIL stuff, shed some real light on it? I've given you my thoughts here. I don't know that there's much more I can give you from a basketball perspective. If there is anything else you guys want to know about with regards to that, you can ask me on the message board or talk about them next week on the podcast. But those are my thoughts on kind of the state of the union, where I think things are at right now. Now let's bring in the legend Brian Snow to talk more about the NIL situation. All right, so we are joined by the legend Brian Snow to help us break this all down. Snow, before I've been talking about NIL stuff here on the podcast leading up to this, but before we get into that, I just want to ask you briefly, what would be your quick thoughts on Xavier's 2-1 start to the season?
They're not good. Like, I don't know if there's any other way to put it. They're just not a good ball club. I think they lack talent. I think they lack skill. Certainly at this point, they lack cohesion, which is fine. That'll come. But I just don't see a good basketball team out there, to be blunt and honest. I don't think there's any way to sugarcoat it.
Yeah, and that's kind of along the lines of what I've been talking about previously already on this podcast. I was just talking about the NIL situation in terms of the Big Ten and the SEC, or the big football schools, as it's always talked about on the message board, and whether or not the Big East can compete long-term in this sport. What's your take on where all of that stands from a sport-wide perspective right now?
I think it's easier for the Big East. I don't think there's any doubt it's easier for the Big East. Now you have a smaller pool to draw from, but let's take everyone's favorite school, the University of Texas. If Sean Miller's saying, I need this, and Steve Sarkisian's saying, I need this, who do you think's winning?
Sark. Every
single time. So when you don't have to compete against football, who makes 90% of the revenue at Texas, 95% if we're being conservative, like it's easier. It should be easier at a Big East school. Because money is finite. Everyone thinks it just like grows on trees. Do you know how few people can afford to donate more than $1,000 a year? literally light it on fire because they want their university to win. Like, it's a small number. And of that number, yeah, sure, at Kentucky, it's going to work. At Louisville, it's going to work. At Carolina, theoretically, it's going to work. But even now, they've promised in contractual form money to football. Like those schools that are basketball centric, Kansas, they can make it work. Ohio State, good luck. Good freaking luck. Even Indiana now, like Darren DeVries, like he was promised a good number for this year. But now that they're number 2 in the country in football and gave their football coach $95 million guaranteed dollars. Okay? Don't you think they're going to make sure that investment works out well before the Darren DeVries investment works out? I mean, this is common sense.
Snow, I think where fans get lost in it and where they get really worked up is the outside NIL money, right? They understand schools are paying them now and there's some type of cap on how much they can pay. And there's going to be a fight between what the football program gets and what the basketball program gets. I think they understand that part of it, but then their response back is always, yeah, but these outside donors are going to continue to fund NIL collective money beyond what the school is paying them. And they're always going to outspend teams in the Big East. What would be your response to that?
It could happen. It's highly unlikely to happen, but it could. Because right now, and this is more an IRS situation than an NCAA situation. Let's be very clear. You can't really just give $1 million to a collective anymore. It's not tax deductible. Like, you gotta funnel things through a business, and a lot of these entities don't want to. These high net worth individuals, it's, hey, I'm fine giving you $1 million. I don't care, but don't touch my damn business.
Right.
And now your business almost, not necessarily, but for the most part, has to be involved. So yeah, can it happen? Sure. It's just a lot more complex. And if you're not winning, they're far less likely to just keep lighting money on fire. That and like what you've seen the last couple of years is a little unique, especially this past year. A lot of head coaches who are not very good at messaging, believe it or not, for high profile people who address the media all the time, they tend to be terrible at messaging in private. They went to high net worth individuals and said, hey, we just need you to step up this year. That's what we need. We can pay them going forward. So, those individuals said, sure, here you go. Here's $1 million, $2 million, whatever it may be, 500,000. Well, now they're going back to them, and those same people are saying, hold up, you told me 9 months ago you weren't going to need me anymore.
This is going to be off my plate after this.
Yeah, like, I've given you a lot, and you're ranked number 41 in the country? Nah, bro, I'm good.
So you've very recently been in those actual conversations of like trying to figure out how that's all going to work, what type of money you're going to be able to get. How real is the donor fatigue aspect of all of this?
It's real. It is definitely real. And what you got to understand is, for instance, a good friend of mine is worth 9 figures, Notre Dame guy. He once told me, Brian, I really like you. You're awesome. You're great. But I don't believe in NIL. If you need something for the program, let me know. Don't ask me to donate to NIL. So you have a large chunk of people who have that mindset, who are of the large donating, pool. So you got that, and then it's like, there's just only so many people that can afford to give away $1 million or 500,000 or 2 million every single year after year after year after year. It just becomes a lot, and you feel taken advantage of. And, a lot of these guys and women, they just, unless they are extraordinarily passionate, they would rather just not have it on their plate. And rightfully so. It's like, hey, y'all are the ones running the business, not me. These are, they didn't get rich by lighting money on fire.
Right.
You know,
At some point, they want a return on that investment, if nothing else.
Yeah, they either got rich by being smart or by inheritance. So someone was smart before them, not by lighting money on fire.
Yeah. I think, take this back to Xavier, a lot of fans view Xavier's situation right now as dire, like as if they're about to be, or they're already in a hole that they're not going to be able to dig out of. What do you think about that? I mean, is that a reality, or do you think that's kind of just Chicken Little type stuff, or what?
Like everything, it's probably more towards the middle than, oh, we're great, or oh, we're about to die and fall off and cancel our basketball program. But the concern would be, no matter how much money they get this offseason, even if it's $10 million, how many guys off this team can you realistically look at and say, I want them back? Less than 3. And, like that's just reality. If I put the over under at 2.5, Rick, you're probably taking the under. I'm not going to speak for you, but I'd take the under. Right. Put it that way. So they have to do the same song and dance they did this offseason. And that's the problem. Like,
that's the biggest concern right now, in my opinion, is that right there.
Like, was Xavier in an impossible position to make the NCAA tournament this year? Yes. Did they do a good job of evaluation and valuing those evaluations? No, they didn't. $6 million is not nothing. It's probably certainly middle third of high major college basketball. It's not nothing. Like, I guarantee you, we walked into a situation at Notre Dame where 3 players were returning, 2 of which didn't score the year previous. 1 of which played, I think, 4 minutes a game. Didn't have anywhere near $6 million. Can't get transfers in who have gone to school for more than 1 year. And you put something together. You do what you have to do. You don't complain about it, you do it. It's not the previous coach's fault. It's not the coach's fault previous to the previous coach's fault. It's just what you got to friggin' do. And you have to make evaluations, and then you have to make valuations. And somewhere along the line, either in the evaluation portion or the valuation portion, things did not go well this offseason for Xavier.
Yeah, and the point I was making, I said something very similar before. I think the jury is out still somewhat on some of these guys, but the point I was making before is they were in a year where they really couldn't miss on any of the evaluations at the top, right? Like to have a chance of success with this group, you had to get right on at least like 2 of your top 3 or 3 of your top 4 guys that were like really legit, and that so far clearly isn't the case. So that's where I think it was an impossible situation, and you also look like you missed on some guys, which happens, but it leaves you in a very difficult spot. The only thing that I'm a little confused on, and I don't know how you feel about it, is I don't really understand the sense of it's all of a sudden dire this year. Like the program's going to be shut down next year, the year after, if things don't get fixed right away. It's like, I mean, Xavier might struggle for a little bit, but programs go through dips. I don't understand why there seems to be this finality all of a sudden of they're on their way out right now.
There shouldn't be finality. There shouldn't. Where it becomes interesting and where it can become really, really difficult and build on itself is when Ohio State's winning a national championship in football, it's easy for the football program to raise money.
Yeah.
If they were 3-9, it becomes very difficult to raise money.
From a buy-in perspective, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So where are the Xavier boosters that matter going to fall? I don't know.
Let me ask you that question directly then, because I was talking about this before you came on. Do you think Xavier can put together something in the neighborhood of 10 million for next year? And does that basically, I mean, if they can, does that ultimately depend on how bought in those big donors are going to be after this season?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I don't know. I think there's a path to getting there. I also don't think you need $10 million. Let's be very clear. That is the top of the top end. Indiana had 10.5. and they're in the top 10. And like this notion that everyone just has all this money is complete load of crap. It makes people feel better, but it's a complete load of crap.
Well, and that's another thing. So like we've got this thing where we're talking about the spending being different this last transfer portal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everyone agrees with that. Like Richard Pitino just said that in his radio show the other night. Like this was different last offseason. But then the next sentence, it'll kind of be like, but salaries don't typically go down. These guys are going to continue to get paid more. So, you know, if the top of the top right now is 10 million, let's just use the Big East, for example. That's the rumor of like St. John's and UConn and Creighton are at that level. Where are they going to be next year? Are they going up or are they coming down? Are they staying at 10 or what do you think happens there?
The Big East is unique because I don't think anything changed with the Big East last offseason to this offseason.
Right. That's fair.
Big Ten, those schools are crying poor right now. I mean, they just are. SEC basketball schools, they're crying poor. Now, how much of that is reality? How much of that is coaches complaining because that's what coaches do? I don't know. But I have a hard time believing it's going to go up. Now, how much does it go down? I don't know. But I do think it'll go down slightly, at least. And the other issue is it's kind of like NFL free agency in a way. Who reaches free agency in the NFL, by and large? The guys that the team doesn't want to keep. The best defensive end is not going to get to free agent. Myles Garrett did not get to free agency. You know, Trey Hendrickson might, but that's because he's on the downside of his career. So the people you want to retain, usually you can retain at the high major level. Not every time, but usually. And that's something to keep in mind when it's like, oh, every coach, we're going to get better in the portal. Well, how? There were 70 probably impact high major kids in the portal this year, and it'll be less next year because there's less of them. So I don't understand how people magically think this portal is magical. Didn't make Anthony Robinson a better player. He's still the third string center from Virginia. Just because he entered the portal, it doesn't make him better. And I think a lot of people just view it that way as like, oh, you entered the portal, you got good. Nah, bruh. You're still the same dude. And there's a reason Virginia didn't care if you left, or there's a reason Ohio State didn't care if you left, or there's a reason Notre Dame didn't care if you left. Because they cared about the other guys.
Right. Snow, I'll wrap this up with you. Any other final thoughts? I mean, I know you're still around, you're hearing things, you see conversations going on, you still talk to Xavier people even. Is there anything else that's come up that you think is kind of misconstrued or a misnomer about NIL and how this is all going down right now?
It has nothing to do with enrollment. It has nothing, like whatever Xavier's getting in NIL for each muskie logger sold, let's just say it's $1. That's to keep average fans engaged and feel like they're doing something. It comes down to the 5 to 10 to 15 people with the means to change things that impact NIL. That's reality. I don't know how else to say it. It might make people upset. It might not make people comfortable. It's reality. It's the world we live in. And that's in every industry. It's the 80-20 rule. Like, 80% of your people contribute 20% of the money, and then 20% of your people contribute 80% of the money. That's just the way the world has always operated. I probably shouldn't say this, but I will. Like at Notre Dame, if you wanted to donate to NIL, it had to be 6 figures. Anything below that, they just told you to donate to the athletic department, because they said it wasn't going to make an impact. Whereas like the $10,000 donation could make an impact to the volleyball program or something like that. So yeah, I mean, like, I think there's just a fundamental misunderstanding where NIL funds come from. But the one advantage that Xavier, Creighton, DePaul, you name it, Georgetown have is money's fungible. They can make it look a certain way if they really want to. So if they have the ability to move funds around in a way that a team that's up against the cap can't, like a Notre Dame or an Ohio State or a Texas, Xavier has the ability to do that. So they have a little bit more freedom in what their NIL budget can be than some of those other schools.
Got it. Snow, appreciate the expertise as always. The legend does it again. Thank you.
No problem.
All right, good stuff from the legend Brian Snow, putting it as only the legend Brian Snow can put it. Really appreciate him. Really appreciate him coming on to talk to me about the NIL stuff, because whenever that all comes up, I want to get his thoughts on it, because he's been in those rooms before. He's had those conversations. He's been responsible for getting that money and using it to put together a roster and all of those things. He just has such a good perspective on all of it. So was glad he was able to come on and share that with you guys. All right, let's switch gears here. And Xavier does have what was thought to be a big game coming into the season. I guess in theory, it's still a big opportunity for this team to get back on track and shock everybody, as they're probably going to be a double-digit underdog, I would imagine, going into this game at Iowa. Let's talk to our guy Sean Bock from Hawkeye Insider to shed some light on what the Hawkeyes are looking like through their first two games. All right, there he is, Sean Bock, Hawkeye Insider, Iowa's 24/7 site, joining us now to talk about this Iowa-Xavier matchup. Sean, Iowa's ranked 42nd in KenPom. They've beaten Robert Morris 101-69 and Western Illinois 77-58. Let's just start with the overall thoughts on the fan base sentiment after the first two games of the Ben McCollum era.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of encouragement. I think that's one of the things that a lot of people had coming into the season. I mean, Iowa's kind of one of those programs where if you are successful, you're going to be around for a long time. So I think a lot of people have kind of just, especially the last 15 years, have just identified Iowa being Fran McCaffrey, like Fran McCaffrey's program. And obviously he was the head coach here in Iowa City, but it was just really odd. Like I said it before, it kind of felt like a fever dream in that first game with Ben McCollum as the head coach, because you're not really used to having a guy like Ben McCollum on the sidelines, or anyone other than Ben or Fran McCaffrey on the sidelines. So yeah, and it's been a different style of play too. One of the things that I think people were really encouraged about with Ben McCollum is that his teams actually play defense. That's one of the things that they really do a good job of, is they're able to sit down and defend, do a good job of pressuring the ball and doing different things schematically to frustrate opponents. And on the offensive end, that's one of the sentiments that Ben McCollum had throughout the preseason, that they was still a pretty big work in progress. I know a lot of people talked about last year his team at Drake not necessarily being the best in terms of tempo. They played at a really slow pace. I think they were last in the country in pace on KenPom, or adjusted tempo. And that's not kind of the style they want to play this year. Yes, they can kind of adjust things around a little bit and play at a slower pace if they need to, but they also can push the tempo, push the pace, and play at a faster tempo, which I think is something that we've seen more of in the first two games. But it's been a very good, nice balance of kind of just complementary basketball, and having an All-American like Bennett Sturts too. I think there's definitely been successful players at Iowa in the last couple of years with the Murray twins and then Luka Garza and a number of others, but having a point guard like Bennett Sturts, who is just so good at being in the flow of things and working in the flow and kind of just controlling the pace of the game, has been a really nice development for Iowa fans, and just to be able to witness it in person too has been pretty unique.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about Bennett Sturts, because I think, anytime you have a new head coach now in this current era of the sport, it is pretty much a full reset. Iowa's kind of dealing with that. Xavier's dealing with that. But in Ben McCollum's case at Iowa, it is a little bit different, because he was able to bring his most talented player with him. There's a familiarity there. There's chemistry already built up there. Bennett Sturts is averaging 21.5 points per game, 6.5 assists per game. He's 6 of 12 from 3-point range through the first two games. How heavily are they relying upon Sturts so far?
Yeah, it's been like he's been the guy. He has been the guy. And that's not really a surprise at all, but not just Sturts, but also the continuity of what they brought from Drake. So they have 3 guys in the starting lineup from Drake, and then they have 2 guys coming off the bench as well, along with Sturts. So there's a lot of continuity there. And a lot of those guys are going to be getting some pretty big minutes, throughout the non-conference, especially with the net and, the margins and winning those games. But Sturts he's been really good. And one of the things that Iowa struggled with this offseason was kind of landing that complementary guard next to Sturts. They don't really have that kind of secondary or true secondary ball handler. Isaiah Howard, another Drake transfer, has had to emerge in that spot for Iowa. And, he's been pretty solid next to Sturts through the first 2 games, but really everything kind of just runs through Sturts. And, there are a number of other guys too who I think are pretty capable of stepping up and, providing good stuff alongside Sturts. But Sturts has been, the glue of this team. He's kind of been what everything revolves around. If they need a shot late in the shot clock, he's going to be the guy to go to. If they are, kind of stagnant, he's going to, kind of back his guy down or play some one-on-one ISO ball, and, really go to work. But that was one of the things that we saw a lot of against Western Illinois, because Western Illinois did a pretty good job of taking Iowa out of its flow offensively, while in Robert Morris, it was more of, some pretty natural, some pretty good flow with this group. But with Sturts, yeah, he's really everything. And, that I think that's one of the big concerns that some people have coming into this year for Iowa, because, yes, Sturts is so good, but then again, it's one of those things where he's playing 40 minutes a game. And that's one of the big talking points throughout the preseason is how much can McCollum really ride him throughout the season? Like, how much can he get him, to stay on the floor? And it hasn't been an issue. Like, it wasn't an issue at Drake. And he's got more help around him, too, that I think is making him more capable of playing those extended minutes. But, man, the Big Ten is a much different grind from the Missouri Valley. And, with the lack of guard depth that Iowa has, makes it really interesting to see how this, how can Sturts kind of hold up throughout the rest of the year in that regard. But through the first 2 games, he's been fantastic. Like I said, just his ability to play, like, just change speeds and also just, kind of just control the pace of the game and, really control everything offensively. And the amount of attention that he draws to and opens up for other guys has been really spectacular to watch.
This one's for me a little bit. I call the NKU games on radio, so I'm a big Horizon League guy. I got to enjoy watching Alvaro Fulgaris last year at Robert Morris and the run that they went on. He's coming off the bench right now for Iowa, but he's the second leading scorer at 12 points a game. He's averaging 5 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 steals. I know it's just 2 games, so I'm curious. Those stats are pretty impressive. He's also coming off the bench. How do you view his role at this point?
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of been the guy that Iowa really wanted to step up as that number 2 scorer alongside Sturts. And he actually had some, off time from Iowa during the offseason because he was playing over with Spain at the U20 Eurobasket. So he's not necessarily on par with the others in terms of system fit and kind of just understanding what's going on. And he's one of those guys, too. I'm not sure how much he was at Robert Morris last year, but he's a very hot and cold type player. He is a very emotional guy, and that really sometimes gets the best of him. And that was kind of the case sometimes during practices. McCollum is during the offseason, McCollum is a very detail-oriented coach. He's a guy who loves effort, guys who play hard like 100% of the time. I know that that's kind of a cliche with coaches, but that's really the case with McCollum. Like he says, like I need guys that are going to run hot and, have that kind of high motor for me. And Alvaro definitely runs hot, but there are some times where he's just kind of like, something happens or, something takes him out of his game and he kind of just checks out there for a second. And that's what McCollum said throughout the offseason. And I think it was at media day, he made the comment where, he runs hot for a minute, he's really good for a minute, but we need him to be good for 2, 3, 4, 5 consecutive minutes. And I think that's one of the things that not necessarily, I don't know if it's a message that McCollum's trying to send with Alvaro coming off the bench because he seems very receptive to it as of now. But that was one of the things that I was really encouraged about in his first game coming off the bench. I was like, well, I heard all summer of just how much of an emotional player he is. And, obviously they're paying him a lot of money to be playing here. I think he's probably the second, third most, I would say probably second behind Sturts in terms of most highly paid guy in the team, I would imagine. And he's coming off the bench and he's seen as kind of that second guy. How is he going to take this? He's been really receptive so far, and it's been really good on both ends of the floor. He's so skilled offensively. He can put the ball on the floor. He's a movement shooter, a guy who can kind of run in and off screens, runs the floor very well. His passing ability is really impressive too. And defensively, he's just used his length to his advantage and getting into passing lanes, defending the post, rebounding pretty well. He's been really good off the bench for Iowa, and I'm interested to see how that if that continues, because McCollum said earlier today he's got a couple guys that, they start well and a couple guys that come off the bench better. So I don't know how he's referring to Alvaro there, if he sees him more coming off the bench in the next couple weeks or, how that happens. He started in the second half against Western Illinois last week. So I'll be interested to see if, like, with this matchup with Xavier, who's a little bit bigger than the first two teams Iowa has played, if they end up going to Alvaro, because he's been playing at the 5 too a little bit with Cam Manyahu, who is another Drake transfer, but he's probably more best fit at that 4 spot. But with Xavier bringing in a couple more guys who are bigger, I'm interested to see if Alvaro ends up starting at the 4 and they go kind of bigger in the starting lineup.
Yeah, briefly, just tell me a little bit more about that. What's the rest of the front court look like in terms of the size and the type of presence that they have?
Yeah, I mean, at the 5 is Cam Manyahu, who is a Drake transfer. He's around 6'9". If he was around 6'10", 6'11", I think he would have probably been, more of that kind of surefire number 5 or surefire starting 5 in the Big Ten. His size, his finishing ability is going to be, something that is maybe a little bit of a concern come Big Ten play. And he also gets into foul trouble really easily. I think he was averaging around 7 fouls committed per 40 minutes last year at Drake in the Missouri Valley. So, teams try to go at him, but he's really nimble. He's really good in ball screens and, kind of being that roll man. He's got really quick hips. Like, he just turns his hips so well, and that, allows him to roll quicker. And, he's a good passer too off the dribble. Good rebounder, pretty decent shot protector or shot rim protector. But then again, he's 6'9", and he's not necessarily a super, he's got some explosiveness to him, but I wouldn't say he's an elite athlete. Then they have Alvaro probably at the 4. Then Tavion Banks is another guy they brought over from Drake who was, could defend more 1 through 5 in the Missouri Valley, but he's more of like a 1 through 4, guarding 1 through 4 in the Big Ten. He's really good at the point of attack. Actually guarded Robert Morris's point guard for the first couple of minutes in the season opener. So he's a guy that can, is really versatile on the defensive side of the floor. Good rebounder. He's pretty good offensive threat too. I wouldn't necessarily say he's your number 1 guy. Like, you don't want him to really create off the dribble, but he's able to make things happen in the post. He's a pretty good passer too, really athletic, really good roll man, cutter, like diver to the rim, like all that kind of stuff. He does really well off the ball. He kind of just understands the system. He understands spacing. He just kind of understands his fit and where he needs to be offensively. So those are kind of the main 3 guys that are, that are going to be making that role in the front court for Iowa. They also have Trevin Urach, a freshman out of West Des Moines, who was Mr. Basketball in the state of Iowa last year. 6'11", was on his way to Northern Iowa. Didn't really have the amount of offers. He actually committed to Northern Iowa before all these offers came in, so he probably would have been before more schools started to see him, So he probably would have been a more heavily sought after recruit, but he's incredibly skilled. But then again, he's a freshman, still kind of working on his body a little bit. He's got some good skill to him, but I think balance and, defensively, he could have some issues, especially in ball screen coverages. So he's kind of that, backup 5, more true backup 5, but they're also going to throw Alvaro a lot at that 5. Depending on the matchup, which they did in the first 2 games. So those are kind of the main 4 guys that they're really working in those spots right now. It's a team that they have a lot of these, like, it's interesting because they have a lot of these like 6'7", 6'8" guys like Fran McCaffrey teams, but they don't really have that true size, like, true depth of size. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you say it's a bit of a question mark right now, the front court? That's kind of the vibe I got. Like, I mean,
yes,
they know who's playing the positions, but they just don't necessarily know how much production they're going to get night to night and depending on the matchup.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe rebounding was an issue too. I mean, they kind of identified themselves as a pretty good defensive rebounding team. At least they feel that way because they feel like they have some pretty good positioning, but they really struggled, I thought, against Robert Morris and Western Illinois in the early going. That and guard depth, because like I said, they weren't really able to get kind of that secondary, top scoring option alongside Bennett Sturts this offseason in the transfer portal. So he's kind of like the only true, I would say, pure point guard on the team. I mean, if that's what you want to call it. I mean, they have Peyton McCollum, who is Ben's oldest son, who's a pretty good player, but he's more of like a spot minute guy. And I think that's really if you're desperate for him as a freshman. So definitely guard depth. And I think, having that true 5 and that kind of, interior presence is really some stuff they're lacking.
Just real quick, what's would you say is this team's strength, and what would you say is still kind of shaky right now?
Yeah, I mean, offensively, it's shooting the basketball. They haven't really had they were pretty efficient against Western Illinois, but they didn't shoot a lot of threes. It's not like these Iowa teams of old where you have to shoot 12 or you have to make like 12, 13, 14 threes a game to really have a great chance of beating some of these Big Ten teams that you're going up against. But I would definitely say shooting the basketball and kind of the spacing and, like I said, the continuity, because you can see it in their offensive system. Yes, they still have some growing to go, but it really helps to have like a completely new coach and a completely new team. But when you're bringing in 5 guys or 5 or 6 guys from that roster, like that is some pretty good continuity, especially in this day and age of college basketball with the new coach. So I would say the offensive flow and kind of, they seem like they really are connecting a little bit offensively, but they have a lot of guys that can shoot the basketball too. And, Cooper Koch, who was the lone returner from last year's team. You have Bennett Sturts, obviously. Isaiah Howard can shoot the ball a little bit. Alvaro's been a pretty good 3-point shooter. There are a number of other guys too that I'm missing that are pretty capable of shooting the 3. So I think, definitely spacing the floor and the ability to shoot the 3 ball. And Brendan Housen too, the Kansas State transfer, who's hasn't really had the biggest role to start the year, but he was one of the best catch and shoot guys in college basketball last year. Just is still kind of getting used to the system a little bit. So offensively, I would say shooting the basketball and spacing, that's a real big strength with them. And then, kind of being able to dictate the pace a little bit with having a guy like Sturts. And on the defensive end, I think, they've been able to force some turnovers. They've been really good at forcing some of these live ball turnovers that, they're able to turn to points. Western Illinois did a pretty good job of slowing things down and, kind of taking things late into the shot clock a little bit, while Robert Morris was more like, okay, hey, we're going to, kind of play a little bit faster and, not necessarily drain the possessions when, Iowa was able to turn some of those live ball turnovers into points too. So I would say offensively, definitely shooting the basketball. And then, on the defensive end, it's certainly, kind of just the ability to force turnovers and really sit down and defend overall.
All right. What type of atmosphere is Xavier going to be walking into on Friday night?
Yeah, that's one of the big question marks, because with the last couple of years in Iowa City and, how things have gone with Fran McCaffrey the last couple of years, the fan base really grew apathetic. And I don't know how much buy-in there really was with men's basketball. You're starting to see a little bit more energy now with this fan base and, how they're kind of rallying around Ben McCollum. And, he's an Iowa guy. He gets it. Like, he understands what it's like to be, an Iowa and a Hawkeye fan. So, like, he understands, like, what Iowa fans want in a head basketball coach. So there's been more fan support. And it was a pretty good showing last week against Western Illinois on Friday night, which happened to be the day before the Oregon football game. So there was a bigger crowd there. I think it's going to be a pretty, like, Carver can get loud. I mean, Carver is a very fun arena to be in when it's pretty loud and when there's a lot of energy. I would probably estimate around maybe 70 to 80% full. And, it also, I think with Xavier's style of play too, like, I think there's going to be a lot more, potential for runs and for, to kind of get out and, like, have opportunities to get the fans kind of into it a little bit more, whether that be, the live ball turnovers, the breakaway points, like whatnot, like kind of just that stuff. So I would expect a pretty decent crowd tomorrow night. With Xavier kind of, the way they played to start the year, this game has maybe lost some of its luster that I think some of the people had, or some of the people kind of identified it to have going into this year. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of, fan base shows up. I think it'll be a pretty decent crowd though for a Friday night in November.
All right. That's Sean Bock giving us his Iowa insights there before the Iowa Xavier matchup on Friday night. You can follow him at sbock247 on Twitter. Sean, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Rick, for having me, man.
All right, good stuff there from Sean, and of course, the legend Brian Snow. Always good to hear from him. Appreciate those guys checking in. Appreciate all of you guys listening, working on some format stuff, trying some new things. Like we talked about, Paul's not going to be a regular on the podcast this year. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and we will continue to try to put out more content as we go forward this season. Thanks for listening, everyone.